Welcome to Revive Ministries podcast. Today, we continue the discussion on healing through the pain, a tribute to PTSD Awareness Month. I am joined with Louie Cruz, author of the book Acclimatic Restorative Coaching Solving Media Overload. Thank you, Louie. Thank you for joining us.
It's wonderful to be here.
It's
Thank you for having me.
no problem. I welcome anyone who comes as a guest because it's nerve wracking. You're like you're sharing stuff that maybe it's all subjective. What you're sharing, how personal that may look to you, but I do find the dialogue needs to continue to happen. And I just want to say welcome, Louie, and thank you for sharing your insight with us today.
Oh, thank you. And I love your open, and I absolutely love the topic. Love it.
So. It's funny, when we talk about tributes, it's always about remembering, and we're so bad at remembering. But disclaimer before we begin, those who are in the U.S., I always love putting the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you are in the U.S. and you're in crisis, it's 1-800-273-8255. But I know there's people outside of the United States who are listening. I encourage you to find what is available in your area. I just want to share, obviously we're talking about PTSD, but it's amazing just how the view of trauma was just about 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. I was looking this up and it said the PTSD was an important gap of psychiatry that causes the result that it was caused by event individuals suffered rather than personal weakness, which I find kind of tends to is an undertone of the discussion. A lot of times when we think about trauma, it never gets addressed because there's a lot of enoughness, a lot of urgency that we put on ourselves as this world continues to go faster, even despite the fact that a lot of us are stuck at home or working from home. Mm-hmm. And with that being said, I know you are U.S. Air Force veteran.
Yes, sir.
Me too. U.S. Air Force. There you go. Well, one of my favorite books, authors is Ernest Hemingway and Farewell to Arms. I thought this was very telling, this excerpt. He says, who is that in the trenches by your side, and does it matter? And I love what he responds, more than the war itself. And I feel that's where we're diving in. What comes to mind when you hear that? Why is the people in our trenches more important than the war itself?
I think that's a powerful question. I absolutely love it. It's our psychosocial network, the people around us, our friends and our family, understand us and our quirks and our peculiarities better than anyone. Sometimes we can go to seek help from somebody and they'll be wonderful. But with a family member or a friend, one little gesture can tell an entire story, and they know how to rush by your side and help you, which is beautiful. Not everybody has that though. And some people don't have family by their sides or friends by their sides. And that's when, I think it helps to turn to God. I think it helps to turn to that inner beauty inside of us. I mean, if you think about it, PTSD is a defense mechanism. And what is it trying to defend? Obviously, if there's a defense mechanism, there must be something really beautiful and powerful inside that it's trying to protect. So, I think connecting with that is important.
Well, the one constant in life is change. I think with my faith, at least for me, God is the one thing that doesn't change. And it is kind of comforting about that. One thing I want to share is recovery looks different for everyone. Let's throw that out there because I know people with PTSD. I suffer from PTSD that some treatments work, some don't. Right. And it just depends. I always say that there are things or events that you can't change. Maybe you can't change at this moment, but however, there are also things that we can make small changes towards in our recovery. A lot of Harry Potter fans know J.K. Rowling, of course. But one of the quotes that I love that she writes is that numbing the pain for a while will make it worse when you finally feel it.
Right. And isn't that interesting? Because that is the definition of PTSD.
Yeah.
PTSD is avoidance.
Yeah.
And it's that's powerfully written. I understand she went through a very traumatic time herself,
Yeah.
and the book that she wrote was kind of an expression of post-traumatic growth,
Yeah.
which is beautiful.
It is a lot of times through a lot of different circumstances, but through the pain, some of the most creative things come out, and some of the creative, I don't know, for me, it's powerful. There's this statement right here, but also you've written a book. It's called Acclimatic Restorative Coaching.
Right.
Yeah. Solving
Right.
media overload.
Little self-plugging.
I just want to share with those. I'm going to ask you. You wrote a book. A lot of people write books.
Mm-hmm.
What message do you hope people reading it will get out of it? And what prompted you to write it in the first place?
If you don't mind, I'll ask the second question first.
Okay.
It started in the United States Air Force in 1991.
Mm-hmm.
And I was eventually deployed to the Middle East. I was deployed to Saudi Arabia, where we had to enforce the no-fly zone over Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time in that region, it was very violent. I'm not sure how much things have changed since then, but it was very violent. And in Saudi Arabia, a lot of the people who worked within the nation came from neighboring Middle Eastern nations who were upset about our presence there.
Yeah.
So to help maintain control of the people, the Saudi government, the royal family at the time, decided to weaponize information against their own people. They would use shock to get people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is a trigger warning, I'm going to talk about some negative things. So and if you call that number that you mentioned earlier, you press 1 if you're a vet. So and that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But there was surrounded by rhetoric. These people, they were immersed in it as if they were immersed in a swimming pool, as if you're surrounded by water. They were surrounded by information, and there were regular warnings of signs posted publicly that parts of your body could be dismembered. There were beheadings twice a week in the nation. Women would be stoned to death if they were seen as committing adultery, even if they hadn't. And if they had, I mean, please, there's no reason for any of that.
Yes.
And it really made things horrible. So when I came back to the States, and I eventually re-entered civilian life, I entered the career field that I saw as an extension of military service and a way to ensure that this never became another Saudi Arabia. And that was working in TV news.
Yeah.
I worked in TV news for 23 years. I worked for affiliates of every network. I also composed music for network television and cable and things like that. And my career was going strong until I ended up at a station, unwittingly accepted a job at a station that was focused more on shock than actually informing the public. And it was loaded with rhetoric. People lost their connection between reality and language, and that gave the power to the most skilled rhetoricians. So if they could say something colorfully, everybody believed it. And that triggered in me several things. First of all, it triggered panic in me because I was afraid. I saw what overexposure to weaponized information could do to people at home and in Saudi Arabia, and I was afraid that it would happen here. So that awoke in me, or had awakened in me, this PTSD response. And also, as science has been discovering, overexposure to such information is dangerous in the first place.
Yeah.
In fact, they found that if you consume 6 or more hours of traumatic news per day, you're 900% more likely to develop post-traumatic stress symptoms than if you were at the actual traumatic event itself.
Yeah.
So because of all this, I fought behind the scenes for them to soften the content, make it informative and not as harmful. They agreed or partially agreed. They went along with it. Some changes were made. And then I created Acclimatic Restorative Coaching. It's the world's first life coaching or talk therapy technique that was created from inside the news media looking out rather than the outside looking in.
I see.
So the book explains all the techniques that are used behind the scenes to create shock news and, the journalism that we grew up with before the internet blew up to be what it is. And then it teaches about the brain, and it also talks about, ways to help people recover. So what I hope people get out of this book, and especially out of this discussion, is that when we're triggered, as I said earlier, when we're triggered and our defense mechanisms kick in, the reason those defense mechanisms exist in the first place is because there's something beautiful on the inside that it's trying to defend.
Yeah.
Even if you look at the videos of, I won't mention any things, but even if you look at some of the craziness of some of the protests that have happened over the last several years, they do things that both sides of the political spectrum disagree with. But despite those behaviors, a lot of them apologized later, saying, I don't know why I did that. I don't understand that. And those were our defense mechanisms that kicked in.
Yeah.
So what I hope people realize first is that there's something beautiful inside of them that the defense mechanisms are trying to protect. The next thing is to, I hope people learn to listen to news or social media or overexposure to whatever traumatic information happens to be. Think less about the content. Consider more of the structure that was used to create the content, because that will help us all understand it was just language.
Yeah.
It was language. So like if you're depressed or you're upset or, you're mad about this political figure or that political figure, and you're really upset, well, you're not present. You're not here. You're not in the moment. You're not grounded in truth, and truth is freeing. So compare the stuff in your head with your immediate surroundings and see if it holds any weight in reality. And the third thing, I'm sorry if I'm going too long.
No, it's good.
The third thing is in honor of Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Awareness Month, is to consider rephrasing post-traumatic stress disorder. Look at it instead as post-traumatic stress competency. Right? We had gone through something bad.
Yeah.
We learned to defend ourselves against that something bad.
Yeah.
Competently. So now, today we may have a troop buying ice cream for his child. A car backfires and he drops. Well, you know what? He learned to defend himself competently.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea now is to understand that as people with PTSD, diagnosed or undiagnosed, the past can and will never happen again. We're here in this moment. All that exists is now. That's it. So those competencies, they may well up every so often, and we should just thank them. Say, thank you. I don't need you right now.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope. And I also hope people read the book and learn to find the beauty within themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what this is all about. The book is all about identifying that beautiful part of yourself that your defense mechanisms are trying to protect, and then reacquainting that happier person with the objective world. What's here?
I just want to tell those who are listening that everything will be in the notes if you guys are interested in finding out more about this book and everything else. I just love the idea because I just remember, thinking about 9/11. That's when I was serving from 2000 to 2004. I just remember going in, and I wasn't even thinking about 9/11. I was 18 years old, right out of high school, and I just remember I never like to get political, and it's funny that word political is how it is, but The reason is because it's one of those things I see all the time. It's polarizing. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, if I'm so right, Louis, what does that make you?
Right.
So wrong.
Exactly.
So wrong. And like
Exactly.
for me, I never find healing whenever that is the case. And I don't know, for me, sometimes it's problematic, especially I remember just with, the overconsumption of information that keeps getting flooded in, and then how televised wars have become even more so as of late. And I just remember, all it does, like sometimes, like you said, if I'm mad, if I'm sad or whatever, I'm just gonna build a narrative around whatever my confirmation bias is. Like if I watch the news, I'm like, I'm angry. Then I'm just gonna listen to things that are angry that will support my anger.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So the thing about it is, all it is deflecting. And for me, all I try, and I think, in a way, listening is one of those things that gets overlooked a lot. Actively listening to individuals, understanding, and actively, self-awareness is key too in this whole thing, because actively listening, I don't listen to the words they say, and when I watch the news, I listen to the reasons they're saying them. There's a lot of level of urgency and certainty that cannot be actually like in a sense, cannot be that 100% true. But a lot of people, like we're talking about, are stuck. They're stuck at home, and you would think with COVID-19 that people would slow down, but it has made things more busy. I hate the word busy, because all it is me saying I don't want to answer 50 questions.
Right. Right.
Well, a lot of for me, I think the urgency for me is troubling. I remember in my groups and support groups, obviously, they're like, I'm watching the news till 4 a.m. I'm like, well, you'll be the most informed sick person I know.
Right.
And that is problematic, because it's this level of certainty, because I know, like you said, I know the content, but honestly, where's your boundaries? Where is your time to breathe or reflect on that? And I think that is sometimes a lot of problematic when it comes to PTSD. A lot of people get triggered, and for me, I find it with this overconsumption of information, it leads to this certainty that's undeserved. So,
you had said something. People will, using confirmation biases, kind of consume the information that complements what they already believe.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, then you'll be the most informed sick person I've ever known. Think about PTSD for a moment. Right? The veteran I mentioned earlier, buying his child ice cream, a car backfires, and then he drops to the ground, which has nothing to do with ice cream and where he is. It's a learned defense. So that means he was already traumatized, and then it triggered a response. So now think about how many people who are politically savvy or maybe politically addicted, somebody says something political, it triggers them, and they all speak the same talking points.
Yeah.
They all speak the same talking points that somebody else wrote.
Yeah.
So that means that at the point they're triggered, there's a chance that they were traumatized before the triggering ever happened.
Yeah.
So it's I love that topic, and it's about trying to understand that there's so much more to the world. There's so much more. And what you're hearing is, these days, especially as news organizations try to boost their ratings and trying to pull in more people with shock, not all news organizations. Great places out there. It was only one station that got me sick and triggered me. But it's which I'm not going to mention. I forgot what I was saying. But it's the shocking, the shock news information, or the stations are about trying to grab you and pull you in using shock, because there's a side of us that is designed to look towards dangerous things. There's a saying behind the scenes, and I heard it at the shock news station, and it appalled me. If you tell someone a tornado is coming from the east, they'll look to the east. So they're in the business of telling you there are tornadoes coming, so you're always looking in their direction. But that's just a tiny little bit of the fuller reality. There's so much more. And in fact, if I were to say, even with COVID, we're living in perhaps the safest time humanity's ever known, how would that feel on the inside? You know, how would that, how would you have to restructure your worldview to accept that even though the media may be saying the world's falling apart, you know, I call the information age Babel 2.0. But even though our electronic world, via news, or social media, or whatever, is telling us that that things are falling apart, what if it's true that we're living in the safest time humanity's ever known?
Yeah,
that's true. And if that's true, well, then there's hope.
Yeah,
and I think it's all about hope.
I like that you mentioned hope. You know, safe places are a very thing that I try to implement. When you go to when I do a support group, one of the things I try to establish is a safe place model. That you know, whatever it says here stays here. You know, the whole thing. And one thing that's interesting about it is setting those boundaries and having a safe place is vital to healing. At least from my, you know, I know people that I still loosely continue to try to connect even throughout this COVID. They don't want to do virtual support, which I understand. A lot of like too much on the screen time, all that stuff. But at the same time, connection doesn't mean social distancing doesn't mean I don't connect with one another.
Right.
You know? And so I still try to connect. And one of the things, and I know I'm kind of I'm gonna skip over because this principal support and NAMI. I'm gonna jump back and forth, but I love this thing. This principal support. I looked at it, you know, obviously doing groups over groups as a facilitator. You kind of look at it, get mundane, kind of get complacent. You just read it through like you're as a group, but at the same time, I'm looking at everything around me and I'm seeing, you know, a lot of peers just assume that they're burdens. A lot of times they either feel like they're a burden, or like when this principal support has to be written down for them because they're incapable of being effective in supporting one another, which I find is further from the truth, because a lot of people who are not peers, it doesn't even matter, how struggle with supporting one another. Support right now is one of the things, at least for me being a peer, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but because they witnessed me, you know, going into hospitals, mental health hospitals, all that stuff, they're like, okay, I don't want Rob to be worse. So they try to embalm me in this static state. But one thing about mindset and the growth and healing, it is not static, it's dynamic. It keeps changing, keeps growing. So sometimes I couldn't cry. I couldn't feel anything, because if I did, it will worry my family members and stuff, because they think, oh no, Rob's getting worse. But sometimes those feelings, you know, feelings, I always say, especially feelings are good servants, not good masters.
Right.
You know,
I would love to talk about feelings if you don't mind at some point.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I want to first go into the support, these support methods, and I want your insight, because I find them uniquely interesting. Obviously, there's like a lot, but I'm just picking 3 of them. This one right here is hard for me for a long time. We won't judge anyone's pain as less than our own. What do you mean? I've been through worse, you know what I mean? But I feel that this, for one, allows you to stop focusing on you and start looking outwards, looking at other people and hearing, because I would say the people who bother me the most are usually a reflection of something I don't want to see for myself about myself.
We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. Yeah, exactly.
And another thing that I want to say is we forgive ourselves and reject guilt. I think for one, we could be stuck there. You know, we're like, I've done something wrong, something in the past that you and this goes back to value. And then we'll talk about value briefly, subtly, but if you don't feel that you're valuable enough to be forgiven, or your guilt is going to just make you stuck at where you're at, a lot of times I know people who are like health enthusiasts. They're like, oh, you gotta run and all this stuff. And it's great. I am inspired by trying to get myself better. But the reason I feel that way, Louie, is because I have more value for myself. If someone has little to no value, they're not going to eat broccoli. They're not going to go on a run. They're not going to care about it because they're not heard. Period.
Well, I'm in the fitness protection program. So after I got out of the service, I was like, no more exercise for me.
Yeah.
But, guilt is a big thing with PTSD.
It is.
It really is. I mean, when I was in the service and I saw what was happening to those people, and you had mentioned 9/11, Osama bin Laden was a Saudi national. He was he was the son of a Saudi national.
Mm-hmm.
And that information environment in Saudi really affected him. But when I was working in the media for most of my 23 years, I was so proud to be part of truth sharing. So people at home can debate. Sometimes it's ugly. We need all ideas from all political ideas, but all political sides. But they debate, and we come to new ideas, and then we create something new. When I ended up at that shock news station, I felt so much guilt.
Yeah.
For all the people at home. I'm like, I'm no longer in the service, but I feel like I need to be back in the service again. So I fought behind the scenes like crazy. And, this is a book. This book is a result of wanting the American people to feel safe, not to change any political ideas. I don't see any political right or wrong here, because we all need different ideas. It's just to help people find themselves again.
Yeah. I used to. Sorry, go ahead.
How is it that 1 second humanity can blast an astronaut to the moon, and the next second we have a soccer riot?
Yeah.
What I mean? We have these two selves. There are these two parts of us, and right now I think humanity's in a very defensive position. But I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. I just thinking about when it comes to forgiving ourselves, rejecting guilt, when it comes to looking at, and you just mentioned the idea that we are defensive, and I feel that that's very true. And at the same time, when I think about this principal support, when I think about just the idea of how polarizing, how right I am versus how wrong you are. I just, for one, I jokingly say this to some of my colleagues. I'm like, I think more people should be around people that don't think the same way. There was a time where you could have constructive arguments, and obviously, there's this old saying, "Hurt people hurt people." I think a lot of people are hurt, and I feel some of this certainty, this grabbing onto certain polarizing idea. At least for me, I could see how it's comfortable. It could be a little comfort blanket. You belong somewhere, even though honestly it doesn't solve any of the problems that you're ignoring today. For me, when it comes to trauma, when it comes to stuff like that, it's more about letting go for me. A lot of times, not to say I want to remember, and part of tributes is remembering, and that's the whole thing, because we're so easy to forget because there's so many lessons. One thing I don't like is quick fix model. Like, once we get this, I'm like, then you just negated all these lessons we learned through this whole COVID pandemic situation.
Right.
There's so many lessons that I learned personally that I don't want to forget. And I want to ask you, before I go to the last principal support and kind of wrap things up, is this, we talked about as tensions continue to build, what ways have you seen personally that helped your own trauma? And what have you seen help your peers dealing with trauma? What have you seen that has worked? Obviously, some of it we discussed, but anything else you want to add or comment on?
And it's interesting. I had a discussion on Facebook about this with someone recently. We moved to Missouri, and there's some racial tension in this area, and the people with whom I was communicating with, they were very media savvy, I guess.
Yeah,
you can say.
yeah, yeah.
And my solution, my answer was the same, right? Hurt people,
Yeah.
and the cycle continues.
Mm.
But what if you can instead find similarities? Again, have you ever said something in the heat of a moment, arguing with somebody, and later on you said, "Why did I say that? Why? I can't believe I said that." You know, that right there are the two sides of yourself. You know, in the heat of the moment, you weren't thinking clearly. And then once you were able to think clearly, you were able to judge that on kind of a sober level. So what have I seen help peers as the tensions mount is connecting with similarities.
Yeah.
You know, if no matter what protests you see, one having to do with storming buildings, another one having to do with setting fires, no matter which one you see, they're both on some level doing what they're doing because they're trying to protect something beautiful to them.
Yeah.
Their family, their children, you know, it's easy for us to say, oh, well, so-and-so is doing such and such.
Yeah.
Because they're screwy. But no, you
Yeah.
know, that's the defense mechanism. That's the soccer riot side of ourselves. It's not the, you know, blast an astronaut off to the moon side of ourselves.
Yeah.
And we all contain both. We all have both. So again, how I've helped people connect is to realize that language is just language.
Yeah.
Philosopher Wittgenstein once said that language is a powerful thing, and yet it can't even describe the aroma of coffee. So how do we replace, you know, the real world that we can touch and see with language and allow it to completely drive us without exposing ourselves to what's true? Speak to somebody on the other side of the aisle, you know, see what they think, what values do they hold true, and then talk about, you know, how you think those values could be upheld. And then you've got a discussion, a pro-American discussion where nobody's hurt. You don't have to hurt people hurting people because everybody's triggers look different.
Yeah.
All based on their own pasts. So
yeah,
I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, and I feel, you know, one thing I want to add before I put the last one. Everyone knows we will never give up hope for NAMI is the last one, but a very important one. I just put this up here. This is from Viktor Frankl, and I read his book, and it really inspired me. But he wrote this, and kind of is a little undertone. He says, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's edit in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." I think a lot of times we feel like we don't have a choice. And I'm not minimizing that because a lot of us, I remember feeling that way too. One thing that you were saying that really, I went to school that was like you know, it was heavy math when I went to university. And one of the things that we always did was derivatives. And I think in my feelings, I try to get to the derivative of what I feel. I will never know what you've been through, Louie, but I know how it feels to be sad. I know how it feels to be alone. I know how it feels. One of my friends who been a podcast guest lost his father during Christmas Day on this past from COVID. And I just remember him saying, like, one of the quotes, I don't know where it was. I couldn't even find it, but I love it. It was haunting. It said, you know, when you lose someone, and I've lost people, and it's just like you have all this love, but nowhere to put it. You know, it's one of those things. So with that being said, you know, we will never give up hope. I feel like hope and purpose in recovery, whether it's PTSD, whatever you're dealing with, you know what I mean, is tremendously important. Because I remember one of my friends who's an alcoholic. Well, not. I wouldn't say that. She's recovering from alcoholism. She said, if all it was not to pick up a drink each day, it would have been miserable. It's not sustainable just to say what we shouldn't do. We're more complex individuals than that, than we like to give ourselves. We're not drones. We're not people that's listening and hearing. We're feeling, connecting individuals that need each other. As much as we hate to admit it, we need to connect. As much as
Right.
we try, yeah.
Right.
But I just want to end by asking you, thank you again. But final thoughts that you'd like to share with those listening, Louie.
Yeah. A couple of things. PTSD, it's something I was diagnosed in 2013. And it's something, at least in my experience, you live with, but something you manage. The symptoms will come up and they'll drop, and they'll come up and they'll drop. And it's just the way it goes, but it is completely manageable. What helps me sometimes when I feel overloaded is I like to put my hand here and another hand on my forehead, so I can remember that all this negativity goes no further than my forehead, which means all that is safe.
Yeah.
So since all that is safe, I take my time using my senses to try to reconnect with that. I use my senses. I pay attention to what I hear, what I see, what I feel, and I allow myself to be in this moment physically.
Yeah.
And I think about what I've just done, and then I notice how that makes me feel. Yeah. And it helps bring me back. Not always. It's not always perfect. I went through something recently, but it usually helps bring me back to this moment. And I think it's encouraging for everybody to realize that if you, no matter what's going on in your mind, look around, right? And ask yourself this question. I would write this down. If I could tattoo it on myself, I would. Ask yourself, when you're concerned, what is right action when there's no physical threat to be perceived? Once again, what is right action when there's no physical threat to be perceived?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's a lot of urgency in this world. A lot of us, a lot of things being told how fast, how quick we have to respond. Take time to breathe. I want to say thank you again, Louie.
Thank you so much.
Share your insight with us today. I want to share those. Louie's book information will be included in the notes, and I'm going to switch over. Yeah. And I'm going to switch over and say, remember to stay updated with Revive Ministries through all its various platforms. ReviveMinstriesFL.com is the website. I'm going to leave you with this one quote, his last quote. It's from Mary Ann Ratchbatcher. It says, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is that quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow."